The rhythmic sound of water splashing echoed in the dimly lit community pool. The chlorine scent, lingering in the air. For Jasmine Carter, swimming wasn't just a sport. It was her sanctuary, her escape. Every stroke through the cool water was a reminder of her dreams, dreams of making it to the regionals, standing on a podium, and proving to herself and the world that she belonged. But lately, her sanctuary had begun to feel like a trap. It started as a lingering presence, a figure at the edge of her vision when she walked home from school. Then came the unsettling encounters. A squad car parked a little too close, an authoritative voice telling her she didn't belong. Now, Jasmine couldn't even step onto the pool deck without feeling the weight of someone's gaze, judging her, questioning her place. That evening, as she slammed the door to her house and bolted upstairs, her swimming goggles dangling from her trembling hands, she knew her world was about to change. She couldn't swim fast enough to escape this fear. And in that moment, Jasmine realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for herself and everyone who dared to dream in a world that told them they couldn't. The door slammed shut with such force that Angela Carter flinched, her hands still wet from washing the dishes. She turned to see her daughter, Jasmine, bolting up the stairs, her backpack sliding halfway off her shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Jasmine, honey," Angela called, stepping out of the kitchen. Her voice carried a mix of worry and confusion. Jasmine didn't answer. The sound of her bedroom door slamming reverberated through the modest home. Angela wiped her hands on her apron and followed her daughter upstairs, her heart pounding. She reached Jasmine's door and knocked softly. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Talk to me." "Go away, Mom." Jasmine's voice cracked, muffled through the door. Angela leaned her forehead against the door, the cool wood contrasting with the heat rising in her chest. She hated hearing her daughter's pain, but knew better than to push too hard. "I'm not going anywhere," she said gently. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." The silence that followed was heavy. Angela could hear Jasmine's sobs, each one like a dagger to her heart. She stepped away, knowing she couldn't force her daughter to open up. Downstairs, Angela paced the kitchen, replaying Jasmine's tear-streaked face in her mind. The girl was strong, always had been. Jasmine was the kind of teenager who faced challenges head-on, whether it was acing a science project or shaving precious seconds off her swimming time. But tonight, something was different. Derek Carter entered the kitchen, his towering frame filling the room. He set down his lunchbox with a sigh, his work boots scuffing against the linoleum floor. "Long day," he muttered, but stopped when he saw Angela's worried expression. "What's wrong?" "It's Jasmine," Angela said, her voice trembling. "She came home crying, locked herself in her room. She won't tell me what happened." Derek's brow furrowed, the protective instinct of a father kicking in. "She's not one to cry over nothing," he said, already heading toward the stairs. "I'll talk to her." It took almost an hour of gentle coaxing. But finally, Jasmine cracked open the door. Her face was puffy, her usually bright brown eyes dull. Derek stepped inside and sat on the edge of her bed, motioning for her to sit beside him. "Dad, I don't want to talk about it," Jasmine mumbled, staring at the floor. "Sweetheart, whatever it is, we'll handle it together," Derek said, his voice calm but firm. "But I can't help if I don't know what's wrong." Jasmine hesitated, then took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's the police, Dad. This officer, he told me I don't belong." Derek froze. "What do you mean?" Jasmine explained, her words coming out in a rush. She told him about Officer Mark Davison, how he would wait outside her school, how he'd follow her as she walked to swim practice, and how today he'd cornered her by the pool. He said, "I'm causing trouble by being on the team," Jasmine whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks again. "He said people like me shouldn't be here." Derek clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he listened. A surge of anger and helplessness rose within him, but he kept his voice steady for Jasmine's sake. "Did he touch you? Threaten you physically?" "No," Jasmine said quickly. "But the way he looks at me, it's like he's daring me to fight back." That night, Derek sat at the kitchen table, long after everyone else had gone to bed. His hands were clasped tightly, his mind racing. Angela sat across from him, her eyes filled with worry. "What are we going to do?" Angela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to protect her," Derek said firmly. "I don't care what it takes. That man is not going to intimidate our daughter out of her dreams." And as the clock ticked past midnight, Derek made a silent vow. No matter what, he would ensure Jasmine could swim freely again. The morning sunlight streamed through the Carter household as Derek sipped his coffee, his mind already churning with plans. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, picking at her breakfast. Her usual cheer was replaced by a somber silence. Angela hovered nearby, her maternal instincts on high alert, watching her daughter with worried eyes. "You need to eat, sweetheart," Angela urged, setting a glass of orange juice beside Jasmine's untouched plate. "I'm not hungry," Jasmine mumbled, her gaze fixed on the table. Derek set down his mug, the scrape of ceramic on wood, drawing Jasmine's attention. "Jazz," he began, his tone gentle but firm. "We can't change what happened yesterday, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Your mom and I are on this, okay?" Jasmine nodded slightly, but her expression remained guarded. Derek exchanged a glance with Angela, a silent understanding passing between them. That afternoon, Derek parked his truck a block away from Jasmine's school, his large hands gripping the steering wheel. He had taken the day off, determined to get to the bottom of this. From his vantage point, he could see the school's entrance, where clusters of students began trickling out as the final bell rang. Jasmine emerged, her swim bag slung over one shoulder, her stride hesitant. Derek's heart clenched at the sight of his usually confident daughter, looking over her shoulder nervously. Then he saw him. A patrol car sat idling across the street, its engine rumbling softly. Behind the wheel was Officer Mark Davison, his sharp eyes following Jasmine's every move. Derek's blood boiled as he watched the officer lean forward slightly, his gaze predatory. Jasmine crossed the street, her pace quickening as if she could feel the weight of Davison's stare. The officer didn't move, but his presence was enough to unnerve her. Derek clenched his fists, the leather of the steering wheel creaking under the pressure. Later that evening, Derek shared what he'd seen with Angela. Her face paled as she listened, her hand flying to her mouth. "He was just sitting there, watching her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Like a hawk," Derek replied grimly. "This isn't just about her swimming, Angie. This man's got a problem, and he's making it personal." Angela nodded, her worry deepening. "We have to do something, Derek. This can't go on." "I'll handle it," Derek promised, his voice firm. The next morning, Derek drove Jasmine to school himself. He watched as she disappeared through the gates, then parked his truck nearby. For the next several hours, he kept a low profile, observing from a distance. By mid-afternoon, Derek spotted Davison's patrol car again. The officer parked strategically, with a clear view of the school and the route Jasmine usually took to swim practice. Derek followed discreetly as Jasmine walked to the community pool. Davison's car crept along the curb, keeping a steady distance behind her. Derek's protective instincts flared as he watched Jasmine quicken her pace, her discomfort evident. When she reached the pool, Davison parked across the street, exiting his vehicle with deliberate slowness. Derek tensed as the officer approached Jasmine. From his vantage point, Derek couldn't hear the exchange, but he saw Jasmine's shoulders stiffen. Davison loomed over her, his posture intimidating. After a moment, Jasmine darted inside, leaving the officer standing by the entrance. Derek's jaw tightened as he watched Davison linger, his smug expression infuriating. He snapped a picture with his phone, capturing the officer's predatory stance. That evening, Derek and Angela drove to the local police precinct to file a formal complaint. The desk officer listened as Derek explained the situation, his voice measured but laced with frustration. "Officer Davison has been following my daughter," Derek said, showing the photo on his phone. "He's harassing her, and it needs to stop." The desk officer frowned, his expression neutral. "Sir, Officer Davison has an exemplary record. Are you sure there's no misunderstanding?" "No misunderstanding," Derek replied firmly. "My daughter doesn't feel safe, and it's because of him." The officer nodded slowly, but Derek could sense the resistance. "I'll make a note of it," the man said, his tone dismissive. "That's not good enough," Angela interjected, her voice trembling with emotion. "This man is abusing his power, and you're brushing it off?" "Ma'am," the officer said, his expression hardening, "without concrete evidence, there's not much we can do." Frustrated, Derek left the precinct, Angela by his side. "It's a damn wall," he muttered as they reached their car. "They won't do a thing to help us." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we'll have to do it ourselves." That night, Derek sat in their dimly lit living room, his laptop open on the coffee table. He researched everything he could about filing harassment complaints, knowing they needed to build a case. As he worked, an idea began to form. The next morning, he called Bernard Grant, Jasmine's swimming coach and a family friend. Bernard, a retired Olympian, had always been a staunch supporter of Jasmine's potential. When Derek explained the situation, Bernard's voice was steady and resolute. "Bring her to me," he said. "We'll keep her training, but under the radar. She won't have to face him alone." That evening, Derek sat Jasmine down, his tone serious but hopeful. "Coach Bernard wants to help," he said. "He's got a place where you can train privately. You won't have to worry about Davison there." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked, her voice tinged with relief. "Really," Derek confirmed. "But we'll need to be careful. No one can know where you're training. Not your teammates, not your friends. Understand?" Jasmine nodded, her expression determined. "I just want to swim, Dad." "And you will," Derek promised, his resolve unwavering. "No one's going to take that from you." The chapter closes as Derek drives Jasmine to Coach Bernard's private training facility for the first time. The hidden pool glimmers under the soft glow of overhead lights, a symbol of hope amidst their mounting challenges. "Welcome to your new sanctuary," Bernard says, his voice warm. As Jasmine steps onto the pool deck, she takes a deep breath, feeling the weight on her chest begin to lift. For the first time in days, she allows herself to hope. The soft hum of tires against asphalt filled the pre-dawn air as Derek's truck approached a quiet cul-de-sac on the outskirts of town. Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, her swim bag clutched tightly against her chest. She stared out the window at the shadows cast by streetlights, her nerves a jumble of fear and anticipation. "You ready for this, baby girl?" Derek asked, glancing at her. Jasmine nodded, though her grip on the bag betrayed her unease. "Yeah, I think so." "You're stronger than you think," Derek said, his voice steady. And you've got us behind you every step of the way. The truck pulled into the driveway of an unassuming brick house. Coach Bernard Grant, dressed in a tracksuit and carrying a clipboard, stood waiting by the side gate. He smiled warmly as they stepped out of the truck. "Welcome to your new training ground," he said, leading them through the gate and into the backyard. The backyard opened to reveal a modest but pristine swimming facility. A heated indoor pool glowed under soft, recessed lighting. The faint scent of chlorine filled the air, and the water reflected ripples of light onto the surrounding walls. Bernard's childhood friend, Rick Johnson, had generously offered his property for Jasmine's secret training sessions. "This is amazing," Jasmine whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Bernard nodded. "It's not Olympic-sized, but it'll do the job. No one will find you here." Bernard wasted no time. He instructed Jasmine to change and meet him poolside. When she emerged in her swim gear, he handed her a stopwatch and explained the training plan. "We're going to focus on perfecting your technique," Bernard began, pacing along the edge of the pool. "Every stroke, every turn, every breath needs to be precise. The competition is coming fast, and we're going to make sure you're ready." Jasmine nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. She stepped onto the starting block, took a deep breath, and dove into the water. The initial laps were shaky. Her strokes lacked their usual confidence, her timing slightly off. Bernard watched carefully, his critical eye catching every flaw. He didn't criticize. Instead, he offered calm, constructive feedback. "Keep your elbows high on the recovery," he called out. "Engage your core during the turns. Feel the water. Don't fight it." Jasmine adjusted with each lap, her movements becoming smoother and more controlled. As the session progressed, a familiar rhythm returned to her strokes, and the tension in her shoulders began to ease. Between sets, Jasmine climbed out of the pool, wrapping herself in a towel as she sat on the edge. The water dripped from her hair, and her breath came in short bursts. "I feel off," she admitted, avoiding Bernard's gaze, "like I'm not myself anymore." Bernard crouched beside her, his expression gentle but firm. "It's normal to feel that way after what you've been through. But the water doesn't judge, Jasmine. It doesn't care about fear or doubt or what some bully in a uniform thinks. When you're in that pool, it's just you and your potential." Jasmine nodded, her fingers clutching the towel. "I just want to feel normal again." "You will," Bernard assured her, "but it takes time and work." Now, back in the water. While Jasmine trained, Derek and Rick worked on fortifying the facility. They installed additional cameras around the property, covering every angle. Rick showed Derek the secure system he had in place, with live feeds that could be accessed remotely. "We can't take any chances," Derek said, as he tested the camera angles on his phone. "If Davison's as obsessed as I think he is, he'll be watching." Rick nodded. "Don't worry. If he comes sniffing around, we'll know." Angela joined the effort, coordinating with neighbors and friends who supported the Carters. They created decoy routines, ensuring that if Davison was tailing them, he would be led to dead ends. As the days turned into weeks, Davison's frustration grew. Jasmine's sudden absence from the community pool and school practices gnawed at him. He drove past the Carter house frequently, his patrol car moving slowly down the street as he scanned for any sign of activity. One afternoon, he spotted Derek's truck, parked near a grocery store. He pulled into the lot, watching as Derek exited the store with a bag of supplies. Davison's jaw tightened when he noticed a swim cap peeking out of one of the bags. "What are you up to, Carter?" he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Later that night, Davison parked his car a block from the Carter house, his gaze fixed on the driveway. When Derek's truck pulled out before dawn, Davison followed, keeping a careful distance. The quiet hum of the truck's engine filled the air as Derek turned onto a side street, his senses on high alert. He glanced in the rearview mirror and spotted headlights following at a distance. His heart sank. Davison, stay calm, he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He took a series of random turns, testing the officer's persistence. Each time, the patrol car remained in view. When Derek reached Rick's property, he drove past without slowing, continuing down the road until he was sure Davison wasn't following anymore. Only then did he double back, parking in Rick's garage and rushing inside. "We've got a problem," Derek said, his voice low as he explained the situation to Bernard. Despite the growing tension, Derek refused to let Davison's obsession derail Jasmine's progress. He worked tirelessly to ensure her safety, coordinating with Angela and their community allies. They kept up their documentation, noting every suspicious drive-by and encounter. "We're not just fighting for Jasmine," Derek told Angela one night as they reviewed the logs. "We're fighting for every kid who's ever been told they don't belong." Jasmine's training sessions grew more intense. Bernard pushed her to her limits, challenging her to shave seconds off her times and perfect her strokes. The work was grueling, but Jasmine's confidence began to rebuild. "You're getting there," Bernard said one morning as Jasmine completed a flawless turn. "Keep this up, and you'll be unstoppable." Jasmine's smile was small but genuine. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Bernard pulled Derek aside. "She's ready," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Not just for the competition, but for whatever comes next." Derek nodded, his chest swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Bernard, for everything." As the family drove home that night, Jasmine leaned her head against the window, her exhaustion outweighed by a newfound sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel insurmountable. The sun dipped low over Newark, casting long shadows across the Carter family's modest neighborhood. Angela Carter stood at the sink, staring out the kitchen window, as dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The weight of Jasmine's secret training sessions and Derek's constant vigilance pressed heavily on her shoulders. She needed help, more than just Derek's watchful eyes or Bernard's coaching could provide. That evening, Angela attended the weekly meeting at Mount Zion Church, a small but vibrant hub of the community. Reverend David Porter welcomed her with a warm smile as she took a seat near the front. The room buzzed with conversation, a mix of voices discussing local events and upcoming outreach projects, but Angela wasn't here for the usual updates. When the floor opened for announcements, Angela stood, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the back of the pew in front of her. "I need your prayers," she began, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "But more than that, I need your help." The room fell silent as Angela recounted Jasmine's ordeal, carefully omitting details that might endanger their plans. She spoke of Officer Davison's harassment, the family's attempts to file complaints, and the secret training sessions that had become a lifeline for Jasmine. "We can't fight this alone," Angela said, her voice breaking slightly. "But I know we're stronger together." Reverend Porter nodded solemnly. "We'll stand with you, Sister Carter. Whatever you need, this community will be here." Word spread quickly through the tight-knit neighborhood. Over the next few days, Angela received calls and visits from friends and neighbors offering support. Mrs. Evelyn Thomas, a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down, became a key ally. Known for her sharp wit and meticulous record-keeping, She offered to document Davison's movements around the neighborhood. "I've got a good view of the street from my front porch," Evelyn said, adjusting her thick glasses. "If that man so much as rolls down his window near your house, I'll know." Other neighbors joined in, forming an informal network to monitor Davison's patrols. They took shifts watching the Carter's street, noting the times and locations of his drive-bys. Some even followed his car discreetly, gathering evidence of his suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, a surprising ally emerged. Camille Torres, a local journalist with the Newark Gazette, had heard whispers about Davison's actions through her community connections. Known for her fearless reporting on police misconduct, Camille approached Angela one evening after church. "I want to tell your story," Camille said, her voice low but urgent. "I've been investigating Davison for months. There are others, families he's targeted, complaints that have been buried. But your case could blow it wide open." Angela hesitated. "We're trying to protect Jasmine. I don't want to put her in more danger." "I understand," Camille replied. "But if we don't expose him, he'll keep doing this. To Jasmine, to other kids, to anyone he thinks he can intimidate." After a long conversation with Derek and Jasmine, Angela agreed to work with Camille, providing her with the neighborhood's growing collection of notes, photos, and videos. As the community mobilized, Davison became increasingly paranoid. He noticed the extra cars parked along the Carter's street, the subtle glances from neighbors as he drove by. He started varying his patrol routes, making sudden stops to catch his observers off guard. One evening, he spotted Camille outside the Gazette office, her camera slung over her shoulder as she spoke with another reporter. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he watched her laugh and gesture animatedly. "They think they're smart," he muttered under his breath. "But they don't know who they're messing with." The tension reached a breaking point late one night. Derek had parked his truck near Rick's house as Jasmine trained with Bernard. From his spot near the window, Derek noticed headlights slowly approaching down the quiet street. His stomach clenched as the familiar shape of Davison's patrol car came into view. Davison parked across the street, his silhouette visible through the windshield. He sat motionless, staring at the house for what felt like an eternity. Derek quickly texted Rick and Bernard, warning them to keep Jasmine out of sight. Inside, Jasmine's heart raced as Bernard whispered instructions. "Stay quiet. Don't move. He can't know we're here." After several tense minutes, Davison's car pulled away. Derek waited another hour before signaling that it was safe to leave. The community's efforts to document Davison's behavior intensified. Evelyn created a detailed map of his patrol routes, marking the times and locations where he lingered suspiciously. Parents of other children began sharing their own stories of intimidation, providing additional evidence for Camille's investigation. Angela worked tirelessly to organize the growing mountain of data. She created spreadsheets, categorized videos, and highlighted patterns that painted a damning picture of Davison's abuse of power. Camille's article, titled "The Shadow over Newark: One Officer's Reign of Intimidation," was published online and quickly went viral. It detailed not only Jasmine's story, but also the accounts of other victims, backed by extensive evidence from the community. The article sparked outrage, drawing attention from state and national media. Civil rights organizations reached out to the Carters, offering legal support and amplifying their story on social media. Jasmine's teammates at school began to rally around her. While some had initially doubted her story, the overwhelming evidence changed their perspective. Several swimmers approached her in the locker room, offering words of encouragement. "We've got your back," one of them said, "no matter what." The increased scrutiny only fueled Davison's anger. He began patrolling the Carters' neighborhood more aggressively, pulling over residents for minor infractions and questioning anyone who seemed suspicious. One afternoon, he followed Derek's truck for several miles, his patrol car tailgating so closely that Derek could see the sneer on his face in the rearview mirror. Derek pulled into a crowded parking lot, forcing Davison to drive past. The community's fear of Davison grew, but so did their resolve. During a late-night patrol, Derek and Rick noticed Davison's car parked near the private pool. He was out of his vehicle, shining a flashlight through the windows. Inside, Jasmine and Bernard scrambled to hide behind the equipment shelves. The beam of Davison's flashlight swept across the room, pausing momentarily on the pool before moving on. After what felt like an eternity, Davison returned to his car and drove off. Derek and Rick entered the facility moments later, their faces pale with tension. "This is getting too close," Derek said, his voice low. "We need to do something before he takes it too far." Angela called a late-night meeting with Reverend Porter, Camille, and other key allies. Together, they devised a bold plan to expose Davison once and for all. "We're done hiding," Angela said, her voice filled with determination. "It's time to show the world who he really is." As the group finalized their strategy, a sense of unity filled the room. The Carters weren't fighting this battle alone anymore. Their community was with them, stronger than ever. The moon hung low over Newark, its pale light casting long shadows across the city streets. Inside the Carter household, a quiet tension filled the air as Derek and Angela sat at the dining table. The stacks of documents, maps, and notes spread before them painted a grim picture of Officer Davison's relentless harassment. "This can't go on," Angela said, her voice firm but edged with worry. "We have to do something before he pushes any further." Derek nodded, his jaw tight. "We're not waiting for him to make the next move. It's time to take control." Reverend David Porter hosted a midnight meeting at the church, gathering a small but determined group of community members. Derek explained their strategy. They would leak false information about Jasmine's supposed return to the public pool for practice. Meanwhile, hidden cameras would be installed around the facility to capture Davison's actions. "It's risky," Angela admitted, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But it's the only way to catch him in the act." Mrs. Evelyn Thomas volunteered to spread the rumor, using her connections at the local recreation center to ensure the information reached Davison. At the same time, Rick Johnson and Coach Bernard Grant began installing discreet cameras at the pool, covering every angle of the deck, entrances, and parking lot. "We'll make sure there's no blind spot," Rick assured Derek as they worked late into the night. "If he shows up, we'll catch everything." As the plan unfolded, Jasmine grappled with a storm of emotions. Though she understood the necessity of their actions, guilt gnawed at her for putting her family and community at risk. "I never wanted things to go this far," she confided to Bernard during an early morning training session at Rick's private pool. The water reflected the rising sun, its surface calm despite Jasmine's turmoil. Bernard paused, leaning against the pool's edge. "Jasmine, this isn't just about you anymore. What you're doing, it's bigger than swimming. You're standing up for every kid who's ever been told they don't belong." His words resonated deeply, sparking a renewed determination in Jasmine. She channeled her emotions into her training, her strokes becoming sharper and more powerful with each session. The rumor spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of Officer Davison within days. He overheard a conversation at the recreation center between two staff members discussing Jasmine's supposed return to the public pool. "About time she came back," one of them said, loud enough for Davison to hear. "Practice starts at 6 every morning. she'll have the whole pool to herself. Davison's lips curled into a smug smile. Let's see how long that lasts, he muttered under his breath. The next morning, Davison drove to the public pool, under the cover of darkness. His patrol car idled near the entrance as he scanned the empty parking lot. Finding no sign of Jasmine, he parked and stepped out, a duffel bag in hand. Unbeknownst to him, the hidden cameras were already recording. Around 4 a.m., Davison returned to the pool, his movements deliberate and calculated. He used a set of lock-picking tools to gain entry, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, he opened the duffel bag, revealing broken glass, rusty nails, and jagged metal pieces. He began placing the dangerous objects around the pool deck, focusing on areas where swimmers would typically enter and exit the water. His expression was one of cold determination, as if he believed himself untouchable. Derek and Rick sat in a nearby car, monitoring the live feed from the cameras. When they saw Davison's actions on the screen, Derek's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "This is it," Rick whispered, his voice barely audible. "We've got him." As Davison continued his sabotage, Derek pressed a button on his phone, sending an emergency signal to the state police officers stationed nearby. The sound of sirens shattered the early morning stillness as state police cars converged on the public pool. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, their voices commanding and firm. "Police, hands where we can see them." Davison froze, his flashlight clattering to the ground as he raised his hands. His face twisted in shock and fury as the officers approached, securing his weapon and placing him in handcuffs. "You think you're clever," Davison sneered at Derek, who stood watching from the sidewalk. "This won't stick." Derek held up his phone, displaying the live feed from the cameras. "We've got everything," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This time you don't walk away." Over the next few days, the Carters worked with state police and civil rights organizations to compile the evidence against Davison. The videos showed his actions in explicit detail, leaving no room for doubt. Witness statements from community members further bolstered the case. Camille Torres published a follow-up article detailing the sting operation and Davison's arrest. The story garnered national attention, sparking widespread outrage and calls for accountability. Despite the intense media scrutiny, Jasmine remained focused on her training. The support from her teammates and community gave her strength, and she began to see herself not just as a swimmer, but as a symbol of resilience. During one particularly grueling practice, Bernard pulled her aside. "You've got the heart of a champion," he said, his voice filled with pride. "No matter what happens next, you've already won." As Davison awaited trial, his supporters in the community began spreading rumors, trying to discredit the Carters and shift the narrative. Jasmine faced whispers and glares at school, but she held her head high, refusing to let the negativity break her spirit. Angela and Derek worked tirelessly to shield their daughter from the worst of the backlash, leaning on their community and faith for support. On the night before Davison's arraignment, the Carters gathered in their living room, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had stood by them through every challenge. The mood was a mix of anticipation and hope, tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. As they held hands in prayer, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for justice, for her family, and for every child who had ever been told they didn't belong. The morning air outside the Newark State Courthouse was heavy with anticipation. A small crowd of supporters gathered near the steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for Jasmine," and "Hold the badge accountable." The courthouse, an imposing structure of gray stone and towering columns, seemed to loom over the gathering, as if weighing their collective hope against years of systemic failures. Inside, the Carter family walked through the marble-floored hallways, flanked by their attorney, Marcia Wallace. Marcia's reputation as a fierce civil rights advocate had drawn attention, and her presence brought a measure of reassurance to the Carters. Jasmine held her mother's hand tightly, her normally steady nerves fraying under the weight of what was to come. Officer Mark Davison sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of defiance. His lawyer, a high-profile defense attorney hired by the local police union, leaned close to whisper in his ear. The courtroom buzzed with muted conversations, but the sound of the gavel brought silence. "The state of New Jersey versus Mark Davison," the judge announced, her tone even but firm. "This court is now in session." The prosecution opened with a compelling narrative, laying out Davison's history of abuse and intimidation. They presented the security footage from the public pool, the centerpiece of their case, showing Davison planting broken glass and nails around the deck. The jury watched intently, some leaning forward as the damning evidence played out on the screen. Marcia stood confidently as she introduced the witnesses. First was Derek Carter, who described the months of harassment his family had endured. His voice cracked only once, but he steadied himself quickly, emphasizing his determination to protect his daughter. Then came Rick Johnson, who testified about the covert training sessions and the efforts to ensure Jasmine's safety. He provided technical details about the camera installations, reinforcing the credibility of the footage. The courtroom fell silent as Jasmine was called to testify. She walked to the stand with measured steps, her chin held high. As she settled into the chair, the prosecutor approached, her voice gentle but clear. "Miss Carter, can you describe the events leading up to the night of Officer Davison's arrest?" Jasmine recounted her story with poise, her voice unwavering despite the weight of the memories. She spoke of the first time Davison approached her, the fear she felt, and the strength she drew from her family and community. When asked about the secret training sessions, she described the sacrifices and precautions they had taken, her words painting a vivid picture of resilience. "Why didn't you stop swimming?" the prosecutor asked, her tone soft. Jasmine paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the courtroom, before answering. "Because swimming is where I feel free. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me." The defense attempted to undermine Jasmine's testimony, questioning her motives and insinuating that the Carters had orchestrated the entire situation for attention. Marcia quickly objected, her voice sharp. "The victim's integrity is not on trial here." The judge sustained the objection, but the tension in the room was palpable. Davison's attorney then focused on the lack of prior disciplinary actions against him, painting him as a dedicated officer whose actions were being misinterpreted. However, the prosecution countered with a series of witness testimonies from other community members who had experienced Davison's intimidation tactics. Camille Torres, the investigative journalist, took the stand to present her findings, revealing a troubling pattern of abuse that had been systematically ignored by the department. The prosecution's closing argument was a masterclass in storytelling. They emphasized the courage of a young girl standing up against a system designed to silence her and the undeniable evidence of Davison's intent to harm. Mark Davison used his badge not as a symbol of protection, but as a weapon of intimidation, the prosecutor declared. This trial isn't just about one family. It's about holding accountable those who abuse their power. The defense, though skilled, faltered under the weight of the evidence. Davison's smug demeanor began to crack as the jury's focus remained fixed on the prosecution's compelling narrative. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters swarmed, capturing every detail of the high-profile case. Supporters of the Carters held a peaceful vigil, their candles flickering in the crisp evening air. Angela and Derek joined the group briefly, offering words of gratitude. "This fight isn't just for Jasmine," Angela said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "It's for every child who has ever been told they don't belong." On the fourth day, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom was packed, tension so thick, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. As the foreperson stood, Jasmine gripped Angela's hand tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "In the matter of the state of New Jersey versus Mark Davison, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted. Derek pulled Jasmine into a hug as tears streamed down Angela's face. Across the aisle, Davison's expression twisted into one of disbelief and fury. The judge delivered the sentence with a firm tone. Davison would serve 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 5. Additionally, his law enforcement credentials were permanently revoked, and a full investigation into the local precinct was ordered. The verdict sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. National news outlets covered the trial extensively, sparking discussions about systemic racism and accountability in law enforcement. Civil rights groups used the case as a rallying cry for broader reforms. Jasmine's story inspired other victims to come forward, their voices adding to a growing chorus, demanding change. The Newark Police Department announced a series of reforms, including mandatory bias training and the establishment of an independent oversight committee. That evening, the Carters gathered at home, with close friends and neighbors. The mood was a mix of celebration and quiet contemplation. Jasmine sat on the couch, her gold medals from past competitions gleaming under the soft light. "You were so brave today," Angela said, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "I've never been prouder." Jasmine smiled faintly. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us." As the community celebrated the long-overdue justice, Jasmine began to focus on her upcoming regional competition. The weight of the trial lifted, leaving room for hope and renewed determination. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first rays of dawn crept through Jasmine's bedroom window, casting soft light on the medals hanging proudly above her desk. She sat cross-legged on her bed, reviewing footage of her previous races. Her focus was sharp, her determination palpable. The courtroom battle was over, but another fight lay ahead: the regional swimming competition. Jasmine arrived at the public pool early, her heart pounding as she approached the familiar entrance. The sound of splashing water and the faint echo of cheers from past competitions filled her mind. This pool had been a source of fear and anxiety, but now it symbolized something greater, a chance to reclaim her place. As she stepped onto the deck, her teammates greeted her warmly. Some offered quick high fives, while others simply nodded in solidarity. Even Lila Davison, Officer Davison's daughter, managed a tentative smile. The shared tension from before seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a mutual respect, forged in the fires of adversity. "Let's see what you've got," Coach Bernard Grant called out from the poolside, his tone laced with encouragement. Jasmine grinned, adjusting her goggles as she dove into the water. The cool embrace of the pool felt like home, and she surged forward, her strokes powerful and fluid. The days leading up to the competition were grueling. Jasmine's schedule was packed with early morning laps at the private pool with Coach Bernard and afternoon sessions at the public pool. Bernard's training regimen pushed her to her limits, focusing on perfecting her starts and refining her turns. "Faster, Jasmine!" Bernard's voice echoed across the water. "You're not just competing, you're proving a point." Jasmine's muscles ached, but she welcomed the pain. Each stroke Each kick felt like a defiance against everything that had tried to hold her back. Her determination inspired her teammates, many of whom began to emulate her rigorous work ethic. At home, the Carters rallied around Jasmine. Derek surprised her with a new swimsuit, specially designed in her favorite colors of turquoise and silver. Angela prepared her favorite meals, ensuring she had the energy to power through her sessions. "You've already won in my eyes," Angela said one evening as she massaged Jasmine's shoulders. "This competition is just the beginning." Even Jasmine's younger brother, Malik, who often teased her about her obsession with swimming, stepped up to offer encouragement. He painted a makeshift banner that read, "Go Jasmine, make waves," and hung it proudly in the living room. The community's support was unwavering. Families who had once been strangers now cheered Jasmine on, as if she were their own child. The neighborhood coffee shop displayed her photo in the window, and the local church organized a special prayer circle for her success. Camille Torres, the journalist who had covered Jasmine's trial, visited the pool to interview her again. "How does it feel to be back in the water?" she asked. Jasmine paused, her smile reflective. "It feels like I'm finally where I belong." The story of her perseverance continued to inspire others, sparking conversations about inclusion and equity in sports. Jasmine's journey was no longer just her own. It had become a beacon of hope for countless young athletes facing similar challenges. The day of the regional competition arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The natatorium was buzzing with energy as swimmers from across the state gathered, their team banners draped proudly across the bleachers. The air smelled of chlorine and anticipation. Jasmine stood in the locker room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted her swim cap and took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Bernard approached, his expression calm but resolute. "You've got this," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember, it's not just about winning. It's about showing everyone what you're made of." Jasmine nodded, her determination renewed. "I won't let them down." The competition began with a flurry of events. Jasmine's first race was the 200-meter butterfly, a grueling test of endurance and technique. As she stepped onto the starting block, she could feel the weight of countless eyes on her. The starting buzzer sounded, and she launched herself into the water. Every stroke was precise, every breath calculated. Jasmine's body moved like a machine, fueled by months of relentless training and the fire of her resolve. She touched the wall first, setting a new personal best and securing her place in the finals. The crowd erupted in cheers as Jasmine emerged from the pool. Her teammates surrounded her, their excitement infectious. Even competitors from other teams approached to congratulate her, recognizing the sheer effort and skill she had displayed. The courthouse stood stoic, under a pale winter sky, its towering columns casting long shadows over the crowd gathered outside. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras capturing every moment of the high-profile trial that had gripped the nation. The case of Jasmine Carter versus Officer Mark Davison had transcended local boundaries, becoming a symbol of accountability and the fight for justice. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched breakfast. Her medal-winning swimming career felt distant as the weight of the day pressed down on her. Across the table, Derek poured a second cup of coffee, his movements deliberate as he tried to mask his nerves. "You'll be great, Jasmine," he said, his voice steady but soft. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Angela placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "We're with you every step of the way, baby." The family exchanged a quiet moment of solidarity before heading to the courthouse. The ride there was silent, punctuated only by the hum of the car engine. Jasmine clutched her father's hand tightly, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. Inside the courtroom, tension hung thick in the air. Jasmine sat with her parents and their lawyer, a determined civil rights attorney named Margaret Hayes. Across the room, Officer Davison sat stiffly beside his defense team, his expression impassive, but his eyes hard. The jury, a diverse mix of men and women, filed into their seats, their faces unreadable. Judge Harper, a woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, called the proceedings to order. "Let's begin," she said, her tone firm. "This court is now in session." Margaret Hayes presented the prosecution's opening arguments with precision and passion. She began with the video evidence, playing the footage of Davison breaking into the pool and planting dangerous objects. The courtroom was silent as the screen displayed his every incriminating move. "This is not just misconduct," Hayes declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "This is a calculated act of intimidation against a minor, meant to strip her of her safety and dignity." Witness after witness took the stand. Jasmine's teammates testified about the officer's harassment at swim practice, recounting how his presence had made them uncomfortable. Neighbors shared their observations of Davison's suspicious behavior, from tailing Jasmine's family to loitering near their home. Camille Torres, the journalist, presented her findings on Davison's history of misconduct, revealing a pattern of complaints that had been ignored by the local precinct. When it was Jasmine's turn to testify, the courtroom held its collective breath. She adjusted the microphone nervously, her hands trembling slightly. "Take your time," Margaret encouraged, giving her a reassuring nod. Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice steadying as she began. She recounted every encounter with Davison, the way he followed her after school, his threats at the pool, and the fear she had carried for weeks. "What did he say to you at swim practice?" Margaret asked gently. Jasmine hesitated, her voice dropping. "You don't belong here," she quoted, her words laced with pain. "He said I was causing trouble, and that I should quit the team." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her testimony sinking in. As Jasmine spoke, she could see members of the jury leaning forward, their expressions a mix of empathy and outrage. Davison's lawyer tried to discredit Jasmine's account, suggesting she had misunderstood his intentions. "Is it possible," the lawyer asked, "that Officer Davison was simply concerned for your safety?" Jasmine met his gaze, her voice firm. "Number. He made it clear he didn't want me there. His words weren't about safety. They were about power." The defense attempted to paint Davison as a dedicated officer, showing photos of him volunteering at community events and highlighting his commendations. But the jury's attention kept returning to the damning video evidence and Jasmine's heartfelt testimony. Margaret Hayes delivered a powerful closing argument, her voice resonating with conviction. "This case is not just about Jasmine Carter," she said. "It's about every child who has been made to feel small, every family that has been silenced, and every community that has been overlooked. Today, we have a chance to hold someone accountable and say, 'No more.'" The defense countered with a plea for leniency, arguing that Davison's years of service should be taken into consideration. But their words rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courthouse building with each passing moment. Jasmine sat between her parents, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Derek's arm rested protectively around her shoulders, while Angela whispered prayers under her breath. Finally, the jury returned, their expressions solemn as they filed back into the courtroom. The foreperson handed a folded paper to the judge, who read it silently before addressing the room. "In the matter of the state versus Mark Davison," she began, "the jury finds the defendant guilty on all charges A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. Jasmine felt a surge of relief and vindication as Derek hugged her tightly, his voice cracking as he whispered, "You did it, baby girl." The judge continued, sentencing Davison to 5 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 3 years. He was also stripped of his badge and permanently banned from serving in law enforcement. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters erupted in cheers as the Carters emerged. Journalists swarmed them, microphones thrust forward. But Jasmine's focus was on the sea of faces that had come to stand with her. Margaret Hayes addressed the press, calling the verdict a victory for justice. "This case proves that no one is above the law," she said. "It is a reminder that change is possible when we stand together." Jasmine was asked to speak, and though nervous, she stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she said, "This isn't just my win. It's our win, and it's a reminder that we all deserve to feel safe and valued." The case sparked broader conversations about systemic racism and police accountability. Civil rights organizations used Jasmine's story to advocate for policy changes, including independent investigations of officer misconduct and mandatory bias training. Jasmine's teammates, inspired by her bravery, started a campaign to promote diversity and inclusion in sports. They wore ribbons in solidarity, turning every race into a platform for change. That evening, the Carters gathered at home. The weight of the trial finally lifted. Derek cooked a celebratory dinner, while Angela hung a framed newspaper article about the verdict on the living room wall. Jasmine sat on the couch, scrolling through messages of support on social media. She smiled at a comment from a young swimmer. "Because of you, I'm not afraid to dream big anymore." As the family toasted to their hard-won victory, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The buzz of the courtroom verdict echoed far beyond Jasmine Carter's small New Jersey town. Across the nation, her story became a rallying cry for change, a spark igniting movements to address systemic racism in sports, policing, and beyond. Jasmine's courageous testimony had not only secured justice against Officer Mark Davison, but had also awakened a broader fight for equity and accountability. It started with local media outlets covering the trial, but the momentum quickly grew. National networks picked up the story, running in-depth features about Jasmine's journey. Headlines like "Young Swimmer Defies Prejudice and Wins Justice" appeared in major newspapers, accompanied by photos of Jasmine in her swim gear, standing tall and confident by the pool. Civil rights organizations, inspired by the Carters' determination, reached out to share their support. Jasmine and her family were invited to attend conferences and town hall meetings where they spoke about their experiences. Her words resonated with audiences, sparking conversations about how discrimination often festers unchecked in everyday spaces like schools, sports teams, and neighborhoods. Jasmine was hesitant at first, unsure of how to transition from athlete to advocate. But with her parents' encouragement and Coach Bernard's steady guidance, she found her voice. During her first speaking engagement at a local high school, Jasmine stood nervously behind the podiums. The auditorium was packed with students, many of whom had followed her story closely. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I never thought standing up for myself would lead to this," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I realized that by sharing my story, I could help others see that their dreams are worth fighting for." Her words were met with thunderous applause, and by the end of the event, dozens of students lined up to thank her. One young girl tearfully shared that she had quit her basketball team due to similar harassment, but now felt inspired to return. As Jasmine's story gained traction, civil rights groups used it as a case study to push for systemic changes. The Equal Opportunity in Athletics Act, a proposed federal bill aimed at combating discrimination in youth sports, gained bipartisan support after lawmakers cited Jasmine's experience during debates. Local and state governments also began examining their policies. Jasmine's hometown announced new measures to ensure accountability in its police force, including mandatory body cameras, bias training, and an independent review board to handle complaints. The changes, though overdue, were a testament to the power of grassroots activism. The buzz of the courtroom verdict echoed far beyond Jasmine Carter's small New Jersey town. Across the nation, her story became a rallying cry for change, a spark igniting movements to address systemic racism in sports, policing, and beyond. Jasmine's courageous testimony had not only secured justice against Officer Mark Davison, but had also awakened a broader fight for equity and accountability. It started with local media outlets covering the trial, but the momentum quickly grew. National networks picked up the story, running in-depth features about Jasmine's journey. Headlines like "Young Swimmer Defies Prejudice and Wins Justice" appeared in major newspapers, accompanied by photos of Jasmine in her swim gear, standing tall and confident by the pool. Civil rights organizations, inspired by the Carters' determination, reached out to share their support. Jasmine and her family were invited to attend conferences and town hall meetings where they spoke about their experiences. Her words resonated with audiences, sparking conversations about how discrimination often festers, unchecked, in everyday spaces like schools, sports teams, and neighborhoods. Jasmine was hesitant at first, unsure of how to transition from athlete to advocate. But with her parents' encouragement and Coach Bernard's steady guidance, she found her voice. During her first speaking engagement at a local high school, Jasmine stood nervously behind the podium. The auditorium was packed with students, many of whom had followed her story closely. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I never thought standing up for myself would lead to this," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I realized that by sharing my story, I could help others see that their dreams are worth fighting for." Her words were met with thunderous applause, and by the end of the event, dozens of students lined up to thank her. One young girl tearfully shared that she had quit her basketball team due to similar harassment, but now felt inspired to return. As Jasmine's story gained traction, civil rights groups used it as a case study to push for systemic changes. The Equal Opportunity in Athletics Act, a proposed federal bill aimed at combating discrimination in youth sports, gained bipartisan support after lawmakers cited Jasmine's experience during debates. Local and state governments also began examining their policies. Jasmine's hometown announced new measures to ensure accountability in its police force, including mandatory body cameras, bias training, and an independent review board to handle complaints. The changes, though overdue, were a testament to the power of grassroots activism. Inspired by the overwhelming response, Coach Bernard and Derek launched a pilot program at the private pool where Jasmine had trained in secret. Called Waves of Change, the program offered free swimming lessons and mentorship to underprivileged youth, focusing on athletes of color who faced barriers similar to Jasmine's. "Every child deserves the chance to excel," Coach Bernard said during the program's launch. "We're here to ensure they don't have to fight this battle alone." Jasmine became an integral part of the program, coaching younger swimmers and sharing her story during practice sessions. She bonded with one particular girl, 10-year-old Mia, who reminded her of herself, quiet but determined, with a love for the water that couldn't be denied. "You're already a champion," Jasmine told Mia one afternoon after practice. "The rest is just putting in the work." Jasmine's influence extended beyond the pool. Schools across the country began using her story as part of their diversity and inclusion curriculum. Teachers assigned essays on perseverance, using Jasmine as a modern-day example of courage. The National Swimming Federation, NSF, also took notice, implementing new guidelines to promote equity in the sport. These included mandatory anti-discrimination policies for all affiliated teams and increased funding for programs targeting underserved communities. Jasmine was invited to join the NSF's advisory board, becoming the youngest member in its history. Her role allowed her to shape policies that would prevent future athletes from enduring the challenges she had faced. Amid the whirlwind of public attention, Jasmine found herself growing in unexpected ways. She became more confident, not just as a swimmer, but as a leader. Her speeches became more compelling, her interactions more genuine, and her vision for change more ambitious. Still, she faced moments of self-doubt. One evening, after a particularly intense day of interviews and meetings, she confided in her mother. "Mom, what if I'm not enough?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Angela cupped her daughter's face gently. "Jasmine, you're more than enough. Look at what you've accomplished already. And remember, you're not doing this alone. We're all here with you." Her mother's words stayed with Jasmine, grounding her during moments of uncertainty. The Carter's neighborhood, once a quiet and often overlooked part of town, had become a hub of activity. Inspired by Jasmine's success, local families organized a community celebration to honor her achievements. The event, held at the church, featured speeches, performances, and an unveiling of a mural depicting Jasmine in the water, her determined gaze focused ahead. "You've made us proud," said Reverend Daniels, addressing Jasmine before the gathered crowd. "But more importantly, you've shown us that even the smallest ripples can create powerful waves." The celebration was filled with laughter, tears, and a renewed sense of unity. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance came together, recognizing the strength and solidarity. Despite the progress, the fight was far from over. Jasmine occasionally faced online harassment from anonymous trolls, accusing her of exaggerating her story for attention. Some local parents complained about the increased scrutiny on the police force, claiming it was unfair to officers like Davison. Jasmine chose to focus on the positive, surrounding herself with supporters who lifted her up. She worked closely with Camille Torres to document other stories of athletes facing discrimination, creating a platform that amplified their voices. "I'm not the only one," Jasmine said during a press conference. "There are so many others who deserve to be heard." As the year progressed, Jasmine's impact continued to grow. She was invited to give a keynote speech at a national civil rights conference, where she shared the stage with activists she had long admired. "We all have the power to make a difference," she told the audience. "Sometimes it starts with something as small as saying, 'This isn't right.'" Her words resonated deeply, sparking standing ovations and heartfelt conversations long after the event ended. Back home, Jasmine returned to the pool where her journey had begun. She stood at the edge, her reflection shimmering on the water's surface. Nearby, Mia practiced her strokes, her laughter filling the air. "You've come a long way," Coach Bernard said, walking up beside her. Jasmine nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "And there's still so much more to do." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the pool in hues of gold and crimson, Jasmine dove into the water. Each stroke felt like a promise, a commitment to continue fighting for change, not just for herself, but for all those who would follow in her wake. The morning sun gleamed against the newly constructed Carter Aquatic Center, a state-of-the-art facility standing as a testament to resilience, community, and the enduring power of dreams. The center's sleek glass facade reflected the vibrant energy of the opening ceremony. A large crowd of community members, athletes, and local dignitaries gathered, their faces alight with anticipation. Jasmine Carter stood at the entrance, her heart swelling with pride as she prepared to cut the ceremonial ribbon. 10 years had passed since Jasmine's harrowing battle for justice and equality. Now, a decorated Olympian, she returned to her hometown, not just as a champion swimmer, but as a symbol of hope. The Carter Aquatic Center wasn't just a pool. It was a sanctuary, a training ground, and a community hub for young athletes of all backgrounds. Inside, the facility buzzed with life. The Olympic-size pool sparkled under advanced LED lighting, flanked by a smaller teaching pool for beginners. The walls were adorned with photographs and inspirational quotes, including one prominently displayed near the entrance. Every wave begins with a single ripple. Jasmine ran her fingers over the plaque beneath it, which bore her family's name. It was a reminder of the journey that had brought her here, of every sacrifice, every tear, and every victory that had paved the way for this moment. As Jasmine took the podium, she scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces. Her parents, Angela and Derek, sat in the front row, their smiles radiant with pride. Coach Bernard, now retired but as energetic as ever, stood to the side with a group of young swimmers he'd been mentoring. Camille Torres, whose investigative reporting had been instrumental in exposing systemic issues, held a camera, documenting the occasion. Jasmine began her speech, her voice steady and confident. This center isn't just a place to swim. It's a place to dream, to grow, and to prove that no obstacle is insurmountable. When I was 14, I faced challenges that could have ended my journey before it began. But I didn't face them alone. I had my family, my community, and people who believed in me. This center is our way of paying that forward. The crowd erupted into applause, and Jasmine smiled, holding back tears. She had come a long way from the scared teenager who had once doubted her place in the world. The Carter Aquatic Center wasn't just about swimming. It housed mentorship programs, educational workshops, and a counseling center for young athletes. One of the first initiatives, Waves of Change, offered free swimming lessons to children from underserved communities. Jasmine personally funded scholarships for promising swimmers who might otherwise lack opportunities. Among the first participants was Mia, now 20 years old, and training for the Olympic trials. Mia stood beside Jasmine during the ceremony, sharing her own story of transformation. "Miss Carter believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," Mia said, her voice thick with emotion. "This center gave me more than a place to train. It gave me hope." The crowd cheered as Jasmine embraced Mia, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. Helping others achieve their dreams had become as meaningful to her as achieving her own. Despite the celebration, Jasmine hadn't forgotten the struggles that had brought her here. The trial against Officer Davison had been the start of a much larger journey. His conviction had spurred significant changes in the local police department, including independent oversight and mandatory bias training. The reforms extended to neighboring counties, setting a precedent for how communities could address systemic issues. Jasmine had used her platform to advocate for broader changes in sports. Partnering with civil rights organizations, she spearheaded campaigns to eliminate discrimination in athletics. Her influence extended internationally, as organizations around the world adopted policies inspired by her advocacy. Jasmine's own career flourished. She won multiple Olympic medals, setting records and breaking barriers. But her greatest joy came from mentoring young athletes. She often told them, "The pool doesn't care about your skin color, your background, or where you come from. It only cares about how hard you work." Her parents had been her greatest supporters throughout her journey. Angela and Derek, now enjoying a well-earned retirement, volunteered regularly at the center. Angela organized parent workshops to help families navigate the pressures of competitive sports, while Derek often gave motivational talks to young swimmers. As the ceremony continued, Jasmine's mind wandered to the future. She had big plans for the Carter Aquatic Center, including hosting regional competitions and expanding its programs. She also wanted to create a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in sports management and coaching. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed, Jasmine stood alone by the pool. The still water reflected the center's ceiling lights, creating a serene, almost magical atmosphere. She thought about the journey that had led her here, the tears, the fears, the triumphs. It had all been worth it. A soft splash broke the silence. Jasmine turned to see a group of children practicing their strokes under Coach Bernard's watchful eye. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that symbolized everything she had fought for. One boy paused, looking up at Jasmine. "Miss Carter, do you think I can be as fast as you someday?" Jasmine crouched down, her voice warm and encouraging. "You can be even faster. But remember, it's not just about speed. It's about heart. And you've got plenty of that." The boy grinned before diving back into the water, his enthusiasm infectious. Jasmine watched him swim, her heart swelling with pride. That night, as Jasmine sat with her parents and Coach Bernard in the center's lounge, they reflected on how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't fought back?" Angela asked softly. Jasmine shook her head. "I try not to. Because this," she gestured around the center, "this is the life we created by refusing to give up." Derek raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To resilience, to community, and to dreaming without limits." They clinked glasses, their laughter filling the room. The next morning, Jasmine returned to the center before it opened. She stood at the edge of the pool, the smell of chlorine bringing back memories of her first swim. With a deep breath, she dove in, the cool water enveloping her. Each stroke felt effortless, a celebration of freedom and strength. As she surfaced, she looked around the empty pool, her mind already racing with plans for the future. The Carter Aquatic Center was just the beginning. Her journey was far from over, and the ripples she had created would continue spreading for generations. "Dreams have no limits," she whispered to herself, smiling as she climbed out of the pool. The sun streamed through the glass walls, illuminating the water and casting golden reflections onto the tiles, a perfect symbol of the brighter future she had helped create. As Jasmine's story comes full circle, it's a reminder that the fight for justice and the pursuit of dreams can create ripples far beyond what we can see. Her resilience, her family's love, and a community's unwavering support turned obstacles into opportunities and left a legacy of hope for generations to come. Now, it's your turn. What part of Jasmine's journey inspired you the most? Was it her courage to face injustice, her dedication to her craft, or the community that rallied behind her? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your stories inspire us too. If this story moved you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another powerful tale. Together, let's keep sharing stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Stay tuned, because our next story will light a fire in your heart and prove that every challenge is an opportunity for greatness. See you next time.